Hello, so I'm Emily and I had case number 12. So for question one, during this experience, I learned just how difficult it can be to not only have the burden of physical limitations, but to also experience social emotional difficulties as well. This experience will definitely help me a ton when it comes to having empathy for a patient. Even if it wasn't the same disability that I had, I will still be able to refer back to this experience and remember how challenging it was for me to understand what they were going through. And although I will never truly understand unless I attain some kind of disability or injury, this definitely allows for me to build that emotional connection. For question two, the ADL and IADL process was particularly challenging to me since I only had one available upper extremity to use. This is really different from my normal baseline because normally I'm able to use both upper extremities and trunk movements in order to move around and manipulate things freely. I also had a cardiac precautions, so I needed to keep my exertion level at a minimum. So like having to bend over and put clothes on or pick something up was something that I wasn't able to do, or if I was, I had to really do it slowly. For part two, question one, the ADL process was definitely the most challenging part of the whole simulation experience, particularly dressing. I had absolutely no idea how challenging it would be. Since I was supposed to stay in the sling, I needed to keep my arm close to my body, elbow at 90-degree angle while trying to put on shirts and undergarments on. Lower body dressing was a lot more doable. I was able to use my right arm, which is my dominant arm, to maneuver clothes around my body. It will allow me to understand specifically what aspects of the dressing process will be the most difficult to them if they've lost functionality of their upper extremity. Another challenging aspect of this simulation was going up and down stairs. The stairs that are outside of my apartment building weren't wide enough to fit my Hemi walker correctly, so I needed to actually turn them sideways and walk up that way. Do I feel this assignment is controversial? I understand that it's controversial to many people, but I don't think that there's a reason why it should be. I think overall that it is a feasible way for OT students to get a glimpse into the lives of our future patients that they're living in on a day-to-day basis. And it's a great way for us to apply our knowledge and recognize different things that we can use in the future. When going out into the public, I understand that many people may think that it comes off as insulting or that we're mocking people with disabilities, especially since we're young college students. However, even people with disabilities get ridiculed all the time for using adaptive equipment when they look perfectly fine on the outside. You don't need a wheelchair, your legs work perfectly fine. But little do those people know that the individual does, in fact, need a wheelchair when going long distances because they're easily fatigued and have lower extremity weakness. But I don't think this assignment should be controversial for us. And I think it's really important for us to be able to relate to the individuals that we could be treating in the future. So for question three, during the simulation experience, I was able to adapt my dressing activities by sitting down on my bed in order to complete lower extremity dressing. And this was really helpful in allowing me to maintain my cardiac precautions and made it a lot easier to manipulate clothes with my available arm. I also came up with a solution when using my Hemi walker going up and down the stairs. So I had to turn it perpendicular. Although this solution worked for me, since in reality I have good mobility and no weakness, I need to remember that this solution may not work for individuals with real disabilities, and further adaptation may be required in order for them to maneuver efficiently and safely around their environment. So when going out into the community, it was a pretty interesting experience. My roommates and I went to Aldi to go grocery shopping so I could get items to make dinner. And it was really weird to watch people looking at me. A few people actually did a double take, and I didn't require assistance much with mobility or getting in and out of the car, but I did require assistance when having to bring groceries to and from the car and back into the apartment. Not only because I didn't have an available hand to use or carry the groceries, but even if I did, it wouldn't be wise to carry heavy groceries because of my cardiac precautions. So with a real life client doing grocery shopping, I would recommend taking breaks throughout the store, going with another individual for support, and making use of the handles that are above the doors when getting in and out of the car for stability and support. For my meal, I chose to make grilled cheese and soup. I needed to buy bread, cheese, and soup, as well as other groceries, which were all scattered throughout the store. This required me to walk around the store and search for these items. And Aldi was also pretty packed on the day that we went, so I needed to be able to maneuver around or ask people politely to move out of the way. Making my meal required several preparatory steps, including getting a pot and pan underneath the cupboard, grabbing cheese and butter from the fridge, grabbing the bread and soup from above the cupboard. Overall, the process wasn't too difficult. The hardest thing was flipping the sandwich. One thing I noticed, it would have been very beneficial for me to have a reacher for this task because the bread in the cupboard may have been a little too high for someone with those precautions to grab on their own. And another person could also benefit from sitting in a stool or a high chair to rest on while waiting for the food to cook, so that way they're not getting fatigued from standing in one spot for too long. So for me personally, this meal wasn't too challenging to make. I think someone with an actual disability would be able to make this meal with little to no difficulty if provided with the proper adaptive equipment. So my group theory was ecology of human performance. When thinking about this theory, a lot of it is centered around the individual's context or environment and how it affects how well they're able to perform within that environment. For my individual theory, I had motor learning, and there are so many different ways that this theory can be applied to individuals who have this disability. Because of the cardiac precautions that are in place, there are a lot of things that you aren't able to do normally or that you have to do a lot slower. Bending over and reaching are two things that contribute to overexertion and can be really dangerous with those precautions. When considering the theory of motor learning, it kind of takes everything from the ecology of human performance and adds the concept of motor skills and task performance. During this disability simulation, there were several tasks that I needed to perform differently from my norm in order to adhere to the precautions that were in place. I needed to learn different movement patterns and techniques in order to successfully perform these tasks. And this is one of the most important concepts that OT addresses during therapy, assisting the individual with modifying or making adaptations to their daily activities and occupations, so that way they are overall more functional within whatever type of environment or setting that they're in. If I were to design a program that would aim to address mobility, transfers, and community outings, I would definitely want to consider where I would want to carry out this program. Needs differ from person to person, even if they have similar disabilities. So if I was working with just one person, then the process would be a little bit easier because I will have to focus on only them. But in a group, I would have to consider things such as scheduling times to meet that don't conflict with everybody's personal schedules, times to learn how to be mobile, patient education. And it would also be important to make sure that the activities that I decide to do don't go against what their doctors or primary care physicians saying, because they could have restrictions that certain individual has due to their injury or illness that they've sustained. And the main thing that we would need to consider is whether or not the individual is truly ready to go out into their community. If there are lingering concerns about someone's general safety when they're in their normal environment, then we would need to figure out how to modify or adapt their environment and make it so that way they are able to maneuver within it as safely and with as much independence as possible. lastly, something that would make this assignment even better for future students. Unfortunately, due to COVID restrictions, there were a few challenges that I had when coming up with places to go into the community, particularly the recreational facility. Because of COVID, many of those places were closed, so we needed to come up with something else to do for recreation that would still apply to this simulation experience. However, I think that overall it forced me to think outside the box a little and be more creative to come up with something. I think that the pandemic in general is part of the learning experience, and it would be great for future students to think about this factor when considering treatment options for patients and accessibility within their own communities. I also think that it would be really interesting if this project was made for the duration of the whole semester or even just for an extended period of time. And this would allow for students to get a better idea of how the disability affects individuals long term, as opposed to just the 72-hour time period. And it would also give them more opportunities to do activities throughout the semester while having the disability. One thing that I wish I could have gotten the chance to do was go back home with my disability and get to see how much my family is supportive and involved with assisting me in my disability. But overall, I thought that this project was really fun and really helped me to develop that mindset of understanding and really getting a chance to feel and empathize what our future patients will be going through in the future.